What's going on, everybody? James here from Artificial Entertainment, and welcome back to another Blender video. And today we're going to be looking at different ways to model out bow limbs for either your animations or your games. So let's go ahead, dive into Blender, take a look at some bow limbs. Alright, so I have here a fresh scene in Blender, so I'm just going to drag and drop, delete everything out, and go over a few things just for kind of early beginner prerequisites. Two things. First thing is that this is a build-off of the Archery and Unreal video where I showed you guys how to be able to make your own archery setup. Specifically episode 1, where we're going over how to be able to model out the bow itself. A lot of the rigging practices and the basic setup is going to be the exact same. The only difference that you're going to do by utilizing anything in this video is just going to be the modeling piece. That's mainly what we're going over today, is the different principles for modeling. Let's say if you don't want a rounded bow or you want to have way more geometry or something really cool to your bow, there's a lot of different ways to go about that. So I wanted to create a video showing you guys kind of some of the different ways you can go about making bows within Blender. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. And the first bow we're going to be making is going to be the simple wooden bow. This is something that makes its debut in almost every video game that takes archery and any serious concept. So to be able to make that, what we're going to do is Shift A, we're going to go to curve, and we're going to add in a path. Now, we are going to scale this down, so I'm just going to go S.5, and then we're also going to apply the scale with Control A, so just making sure to apply that. Now, what we're going to do once we have our path here is we're going to tab into Edit Mode, box select the 3 middle vertices, right-click, Subdivide. Now, we're going to use Control I to inverse the selection. This way, we just have the 2 endpoints, and then we're going to go G and Z, -1. Now, by doing this, it creates a very dramatic curve, and you can even move this up a little bit depending on how you would like it, but realistically, you want to start with something super dramatic that's almost like a little over a 45-degree angle. Now, once you have that position, we can go into the Object Data Properties here with this icon, go to Geometry, and then we're also going to open up Active Spline, because these are going to be the 2 things that we're actually going to mess with. Now, we'll start with Active Spline, we'll change the order U from 5 to 6, and then also uncheck Smooth, and then we can close this, because that's all we need to do on that one. Now, under Bevel, what we're going to do is we're going to change it from Round to Profile, and we're going to make sure Fill Caps is selected, and change the resolution from 4 to 1. Now, we also want to go down to the graph here, and then just click and drag up into the corner, making sure that the X value and Y values are both set to 1 as well. Now, once you have that all set up, what you can do is go to the depth here, and then just set it to something like 0.05, and what you'll get is this nice kind of cube shape, and it'll make it so that way you'll get that more kind of like flattened wood look by the time that you're done, because now that we have this, we can tab back into object mode here, kind of zoom out a little bit, and then go S and Z to scale it down, and you'll see what kind of magic starts to happen, right? We get a nice thin section on our middle point, but the ends are a little too wide. Now, we are going to fix this, don't worry, this is all going to work out in the end. Now, but you can kind of start to see what magic is starting to happen here. So what we're going to do is we're going to right-click, Convert to Mesh, and then we're going to go into Edit Mode with Tab, 3 to go into Face Selection mode, and then we're going to Alt Select, so we're going to Alt and then click on any of these faces at the end here, making sure to loop select it, and then C on our keyboard, and then press and hold the left mouse button to select all of these, just kind of drag it over, and then use the right mouse button to deselect, and then we're also going to turn on Proportional Editing, this icon up here. Now, for this style of bow, when you have these types of like scaling differences, this is where the proportional editing tool actually starts to shine. So we can actually go S to scale, and as you can see, just like always, it cuts into about halfway into our mesh. So what we're going to do is we're going to scale this down, but what we want to do is start it wherever the curvature starts and the kind of the extrusion or the expansion of the end piece starts. So like wherever it's not the same. So right about here is where we want it, because we can then go Z.5, enter. So we're scaling it 0.5 along the z-axis from that point where it kind of starts to deform and become a little wider. And as you can see, it creates almost an exact lineup all the way down. So we're going to do the same thing on this side. So we're just going to go Alt and loop select this section, and then C, and then just drag over this area here, and then go S, Z.5, and enter. There we go. Now we got a nice start to our bow limb. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to want to model out the handle. Now in the Archery for Unreal video, which again, this is kind of what we're stemming off to. If you guys have not watched that, I'll make sure to leave a link in the description, so that way you can go back and get a more better idea about how to do the overall process. But in that video, I showed you guys how to be able to use pre-existing geometry to make the handle. However, this one is too square to be able to actually do that. So we're going to use an add-on that comes built into Blender, but doesn't come activated. And the add-on is called Loop Tools. Now, if you don't have this activated, you can easily just go up to Edit, Preferences, under Add-ons, go to the search here and just type Loop Tools, and you should see it under Mesh Loop Tools. Make sure that's checked, and you're good to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our bow, tab into edit mode, and we're going to look for this section of faces that are right on the origin point, which is going to be this part right here. Now we're going to go Control R, add in a loop cut right over that origin point, and we're going to left click and right click just to make it so that way it snaps right in the center. Now from here we'll go into edge or face selection mode with 3, holding Alt and Shift together. We're just going to select a few faces down the line, but not the whole thing this way. We're going to make life a little easier for ourselves from here. So what we're going to do is go and turn on X-ray mode with this icon up here, bring up the drag selection tool with C, use our mouse wheel to make it a little bit bigger, and just use that to select the other half of the mesh. From here, now what we can do is P, and then it'll bring up a separate section, and we can go click on selection. And what this will do is separate this part from this part, giving you literally 2 halves of the bow. Now from here, we're just going to tab back into object mode here, click on one of these sides. Also, I do recommend turning off X-ray mode. You don't really need it on. And then we're going to go GX.1. And then on the other side, we're just going to go GX negative 0.1. And the reason why we're doing that is because it's going to create a exact even separation on both sides. This way we keep the symmetry of our bow. But now with this side selected, it doesn't really matter which side, just, pick a side. And then 2 to go into edge selection mode here. And then we're going to hold Alt and then select on one of these rim edges here. It'll loop select the edge, and we'll just go F to fill. This way it creates a face here that we can then use. Now what we're going to do is tab back into object mode here, click on the other side, tab into edit mode, and we're going to do something a little different here, utilizing that loop tools add-on. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this edge and then shift select on these 3 edges here. So we're getting basically the edges on the sides, right click, and now you should see loop tools as a new option, and we'll just click on bridge. Now, I will say this does happen sometimes, so if you get that, the fix is literally just to go and select the opposite. So rather than the sides, we'll go with the top, right click, loop tools, bridge, and as you can see, it works perfectly now. I haven't quite figured out why, it does that, because I've had it happen on different sides. It might be just due to the orientation or the axis point that it's on. I'm not really sure. But if it does happen to you like that, just go ahead and select the top and bottom. If if the edges on the sides work perfectly, then awesome. But once you have this bridged, we're just going to, with these selected, right click, and we're going to subdivide this. Now we want to make sure we subdivide it a little bit more. So we want to set the subdivision levels to 2, so the number of cuts to 2. So now that we have this section here, what we're going to do is we're going to go select on this face and all of these middle faces here, and then we're going to go subdivide, creating a little bit of a subdivision in the middle here, and then we're going to go up to loop tools by right clicking, and then click on circle. And you can see kind of what happens here. Now we have this little circle that we have inside of our mesh. Because what we can do is we're going to turn on snapping, turn off proportional editing, and make sure that the snapping is set to face. Because now what we can do is just go E on our keyboard and X, and it'll snap it to this side. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, and I do recommend doing this, if you go G and X, bring it back a little, go to the faces, these ones here, make sure to delete them before. So once you delete them, just go into edge selection mode, hold Alt, and then loop select that edge there, and then just do the same thing, where you can just go G and then just kind of push it up to this face here. Now, make sure you do G and X, though, because this way it doesn't move it on the Z axis as well. It keeps its line up. But the reason why we do this is because if we go into face selection mode with 3, Alt select this whole thing here. Now we don't have to worry about the inside faces. We only have to worry about this. So we can go SY, scale it in a little bit, SZ, scale it up a little bit. Now I would recommend making sure to keep an eye on where it is by comparison to its edge. You do not want this to go beyond that lip here, but you also want to make sure that it is wide enough for your character to be able to grab appropriately. So usually what I like to do is something like this. Now from here, what we're going to do is we're going to actually do a simple trick to make the knock for this. So we're going to go Shift A, Mesh, and we're going to add in a cube. Scale the cube down a little bit. Use the period or delete key to be able to kind of zoom back in on it. But what we're going to do is we're going to use this cube to actually cut out the knock. Now the reason why we're doing this on this one is because when it comes to flatter topology, this works out really well. Sometimes it works out with rounded topology, but it's never a guarantee. So what I suggest is when you're using rounded topology, sometimes it's better just to remove it. But because this is all starting from flat topology, it actually works. It shouldn't work, but it does. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, click on the bow limbs here. We're going to make sure to join both sides together. So we do want to make sure that these are joined together. So we're going to take both sides here, highlight them with, by shift clicking one and then just Control J. And then we're going to click on the bow limbs that have now been joined together, go to the modifiers tab, add modifier, and the modifiers tab is the wrench icon here. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on Boolean. Now, we're going to take this cube here. This is going to be our Boolean object. So what we want to do is go to the eyedropper tool under Object and select that cube. Because now if we just hover over the Boolean, Control A to apply it, delete the cube out, you'll see that we have this nice cutout here for our arrow knock. It was probably a little too big. You can resize it and play with it however you want. But this is just kind of an easy way to be able to get that cutout rather than having to manually remove and then fill in each section. With these types of simple bow setups, you can do a lot more than what you would normally be able to do with more complex geometry. Now from here, all we have to do to be able to kind of finish it up before it's ready for rigging is just go ahead and add in our string, right? So we're going to RY90, then we'll go ahead and we'll just scale this down a little bit more. So we get something nice and small, SNX. Keep scaling it down until we get a nice bowstring. Drag it down a little bit. And there we go. Nice, simple, basic wooden bow. And then again, from the process here, you would do the same rigging setup that you would do in the other video. So once you have this together, go ahead and set up your rig, make sure everything is named, parent everything together, set up your vertex groups, and once that's done, join your string to your bow, all that good stuff. Now the next style that we're going to look at is going to be utilizing the curve, but it's not going to be utilizing it as the main mesh. So what we're going to do is we're going to go Shift A, mesh, and we're going to look at, Shift A, curve, and we're going to look at a path again. And we're going to go S.5, and then we're going to go Control A to apply the scale, tab into edit mode here. Now what we're going to do is going to be very similar to what we did in the Archery for Unreal video, where we're going to take the middle vertices here, subdivide them, Control I, and then shape them to our bow style. So something like this. But rather than using the geometry tab to be able to make the bow's geometry, we're actually going to use another object, another primitive. So we're going to go Shift A, mesh, and we're going to add in a cylinder. Now, one thing I do recommend, because if you want to make a nice high topology bow, something that's going to look really sleek, I do recommend taking the vertex count, making it at a minimum of 85, but 105 to 110 is usually better as well. Now, you won't see much of a difference between 85 and 110, but when it loads into Unreal Engine, you will. So that's why I'm just telling you, you can do it whatever you want. Make sure it's at a minimum of 85, though. Otherwise, you're going to see the lines on it. Now, once you have your cylinder nice and smoothed out, we're just going to kind of scale it down a little bit. RY90, making sure that it's properly axised here, and then we'll scale it in a little bit more. Now, what we're going to do, make sure not to move anything, but we're going to go add modifier, and we're going to add two modifiers to this. First one's going to be an array modifier, and that's under generate. Second one's under deform, and we're going to have a curve modifier. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to change the factor of x under the array modifier to 0, and we're going to change the factor of z to 1. And then what we're going to do under the curve modifier, where it says curve object, we want to go ahead and take the eyedropper tool and select on that path that we created. Now you'll see we get a kind of a start to our bow here. We need to do some adjustments, but at least it's starting on the curve start. Because now what we can do is we can take the count and just move it up until it gets to something that's appropriate for what we like. So we'll see what 36 is. You know, it might be a little too light, so we'll go 37. And it's a little too much, so one thing you do want to try and do is make sure that your object is going to match the overall length of your bow. So you don't want your object to be longer than your curve. So what I suggest is go into edit mode with tab. And as you'll see, we just get the middle here. We don't get the whole thing. We just get that one piece that we made because the array is a temporary geometry section until you apply it. So what we can do is we can go S, X, scale it in just a slight bit, tab back into object mode. Now you'll see that this is no longer reaching the end at all, and that's totally fine. So we can bring it up to like 39, and then just play around with it, you know? We'll go S and X just a smidge here, and then we'll take 39, we'll turn it down to 38, you know, so actually 39 looks like it fits well, right there. Perfect, right? So now that we have our geometry, we can also increase its heft as well, because as you can see, this looks more like a noodle. This doesn't really look like a bow, right? So what we're going to want to do is go S, Shift X, and scale it up. Now once we've done that once, we can just hold Shift and then hit R to repeat until we get a nice heft that we like. Something like this looks good for me. So now what I'm going to show you guys is this is where it gets really, really, really cool. So let's say you wanted to add some really cool geometry to your bow. Like you wanted to make it look almost like a spine bow or something like that, right? Well, what you can do is, if you go into the geometry here, So if you go into edit mode, Control R to add a loop cut, and then scroll up on your mouse wheel, just like this. So this is going to create 2 loop cuts, left click, right click. Make sure they're dead center. 3 to go into face selection mode, Alt to loop select that middle, ES. Just like this. Because now if I go back into object mode with tab, look at that. Creates that nice inset all the way down the bow. And you can do this as crazy as you want. Like, you know, you say you want to do another one here. Just do a Control R, then do the Alt loop select, and then ENS. And you can do the same thing, kind of making it more unique. You know, you can add as much geometry or as little as you want. And look at that. I mean, it looks crazy and wild. Probably not something you'd really want to use, but, you know, let's say you were making like a pipe bow for like a simple game, you know, they made it basically out of piping ends. Well, that's what this kind of looks like, right? So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this. Now, once you get the style you want, like let's say this is the style of bow I wanted, right? I wanted this to be super heavy geometry, super wild, super crazy. Well, what we can do is go apply the curve modifier. Whoops, sorry. Apply the array modifier and then the curve modifier. Do not apply them backwards. Because now if we go into edit mode, you'll see that we have all the geometry all the way around now. So what we can do is just Alt, and then we're going to hold Shift and select the entire end piece here. Now we also want to make sure we select the insides as well. Something like this. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to get like a nice clean piece of the end. Because what we're going to do is basically the same process that we did before, turning on proportional editing, looking at where it scales or bends. So for us, we'll scroll this in a little bit. And then we're going to go Z.2 and then enter. And then do the same thing on the other side here. So we're going to go into the, kind of zoom in a little bit, holding Shift and Alt together and just selecting, you know, a few faces in. We want to make sure we have enough topology to really work with. So we'll go right about there. Looks good. Because it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, you don't have to go like, oh, it has to be the exact one piece in. It just has to be like within reason. Had the other side selected, so I just want to make sure to deselect that. So now with this side selected, we can go SZ.2 and enter. And there we go. So now we have a nice start to our bow, and it looks pretty cool. But we're not done yet. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to look for the middle of our bow, which is right about here, which is actually okay. Because what we can do is we'll take right down the center here. So it doesn't have to be the exact middle. Just, you know, you want to get it as close as you can. Because then what we're going to do is just like what we did to select the make the bow handle on the first video that I made, we're going to kind of do the same thing, except what we're going to do is separate it like what we did with the loop tools version. So we're going to make sure we select all of the interior loops here before we go and get the selection tool. This way we just make sure that we're not selecting extra things that we do not want. So once we have kind of something like that selected, again, go into X-ray mode, C to bring up the drag selection tool, and just make sure you have everything on this side selected. P, separate by selection, tab back into object mode, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go we're going to go GX.1 or -0.1, and then GX.1, and then we're going to go into object mode, making sure to delete this face here, because we don't want these two faces, so it's actually going to be 2 faces. So making sure to delete both of those out and turning off X-ray mode. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to loop select, so go into edge selection mode with 2, and then Alt select the edge here, and then we're just going to go and drag it along. Now we actually also want to change our snapping tool. So we're going to go, instead of face, we want to set it to edge. Because now we're just going to go EX, and then we're going to have it snap right to this side here. And the reason why we're wanting to do that is because this gives us a nice separation that we can use for our handle, just like what we did with the other one. So we're going to go back into object mode, join these two together, Control J, and then we're going to go back into edit mode here, and then we're going to loop select this ES Shift X, just get it in a little bit, and then repeat it with holding Shift and tapping of R. And there we go. And now we're just going to do the same thing on this one. I'm going to show you guys. So we're going to go Mesh, Shift A, and then we're just going to add in a cube, scale it down, way down. Then we're going to go G and Y, scale it down even more. We're going to use, just like what we did on the other one, we're going to use the Boolean modifier. But I'm going to show you guys what happens if you try to do too much heavy topology. This might work It kind of goes 50-50 for me. I'm not even going to lie. But it might work, it might not. I'm hoping it doesn't work. It's kind of what I'm hoping is going to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this cube, put it in the middle here. Now, one thing I recommend is you can put it as high or as low as you want, but try to centralize it as best you can. Something like this, you know, centralize it on the bow. So like if you look at the middle, that's pretty dead center on the bow. So we'll take this, go to the bow limbs here, go to our modifiers tab, add modifier, and now we're just going to click on Boolean. Now we'll go to the object, eyedropper tool, click on the cube. Now it looks like this did actually cut it out properly, but sometimes it does not. And what I wanted to show you guys was if you have to use fast, but it looks like it's working well, so we're actually all good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go Alt-H to unhide the cube, and then we're going to apply the Boolean modifier by clicking on the limbs and then Control-A while hovering over it. Delete the cube out, Shift-A, go to Mesh, and then we're going to add in a cylinder. Scale it way down, bring it down, RY90, scale it down again, SX, scale it in again, SX. And I have to say, in all honesty, even though it's definitely a little too much geometry, it still looks really cool. And here's where it gets even cooler is that anything that you do in Blender for texturing, so I'm just gonna show you guys this real quick. So if you go down to material properties here, this is how you can add textures. So if I go into edit mode here, and I just select, let's say, all of these big faces here. So I take this, 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 and then I just go down and select all of the larger faces, right? So I'll time lapse over this, so that way you guys don't have to sit here and watch me loop select. All right, so now that we have all this loop selected here, what we can do is actually, we're going to go to the material properties here. We're going to click this plus sign twice and then click plus new. And this is going to be the main material that's going to get applied to everything. So we'll call this limb main. And then we'll take this one plus new limb emission. So this is just to show you guys, like if you want to make like a cool looking futuristic boat, right? What you can do is take the limbs main, take its base color, turn it to something dark. Take the limb emission, and we're going to scroll down a little bit, and we're going to look for where it says emission. So down here, we're going to take the emission color, turn it up to white. So let's take the scale value here, turn it up to white, and I'm going to make it like a light, kind of like a cyan blue. Turn the emission strength up. Now this is just so you can see what it looks like. So we're going to put it into Eevee. We're going to make sure bloom is turned on. Make sure all of these are turned on. Because if I go into the shading view now, and with all this selected, now what we can do is with a limb emission, we can just click on assign, make like, again, this is with all of those middle points selected. If I click on assign, you'll see that now it adds that color in. And this is a great way to be able to see how things are separated out, because even though a lot of textures and information for textures from Blender do not carry into Unreal Engine, you can actually make these emission materials very easily inside of Unreal Engine, or just use a Quixel Bridge library material if you're looking for something more like a wood or metal or something more dynamic and, you know, looks better. But for like simple emissions, what I like to do is use Blender to see how it looks and then just copy in the value. Like just basically take the same cyan color and the black bow limbs and call it a day. And you can even go a little step further too and put this, like, for example, as your string. And now you've got kind of like almost like an Athenian bow looking thing. You know, you would just change this from maybe like this blue color, something more like a gold color, right? Just saying, you know, some really cool stuff that you can do with this if you get creative. So that's it for the modeling portion of today's video. So now what I want to do is I want to show you guys what's going to happen depending on how you have your limbs set up on your actual rigging setup. So I'm going to load up a project real quick and I'm going to show you guys a couple of demonstrations. So I have here 3 bows that I've modeled. Now these are using the process that I showed you in the Archery for Unreal episode, where we just kind of scaled in and created a bunch of bow model, created the simple bow model, added in the string, and everything is rigged all the same. Now, the only difference between these is that this one, each limb section is constructed of 4 bones, this one is constructed of 3 bones, and this one is constructed of 6 bones. The rotation on the IK is exactly the same, and as far as how they were set up is exactly the same. So all of these, the only difference is the bone count. These are even the same model, so I just duplicated them. So what I want to show you guys is if I go into this one here, we'll start actually off with 3 bones here. So I'm going to go into pose mode here, and I'm going to show you guys what happens with just 3 bones. So if I turn the influence all the way up on the IK here, and then I'll take this and I'll just draw it back so that way it looks better. Go back into object mode here, and then hide the armature. You'll notice the bone's deformity actually causes jaggedness on the model itself. And this is because of a limited structure of bones. So 3 bones, really good for low poly models, but if you want something that looks really unique and dynamic, you're going to need more. So this is something you could use on a low poly system. Now, let's take a look at 4 bones. So this is the 4 bone setup. So I'm going to go into edit mode here, or pose mode, I'm sorry. And then I'm going to turn the influence up on this one. Putting the drawstring back down here, then going back into object mode and hiding the armature. Now you see, there's a little bit more smoothness happening on the model. Not a lot, but it's only 1 bone difference. Now let's go take a look at what 6 bones looks like. So we'll go to the bones properties here, go into pose mode, and I'm going to turn the influence up on this one. And we'll turn the influence up on this side, drag this down here, go back into object mode and hide the armature. Now you'll see there's almost no deformity, at least no like real jagged, like really edgy, weird looking stuff, right? But we still get that nice bow bend. Now what's happening here, just so you guys know, is that the number of bones actually smooths out the overall deformation of the mesh. So the more bones you have is going to smooth out that deformation when it goes in and tries to actually create the models. Now I will say, I did not spend a lot of time lining up the actual armature on this, and I did this purposefully, so that way you guys can see that if you just go in and do it quick, you add in more bones, you can still get that nice smooth-ish geometry. But if you take the time to line up your armature, it's always going to look better. But just wanted to show you guys, like, if you use less bones or more bones, it's entirely up to you as to how many bones you use. It just depends on your setup. Now, the other thing as well is that when you set up the overall like position for the bones, the farther up the limbs, the more bend it's going to have. So you can make your bend start right before the handle. Hell, you can make your bend start right in the middle of the handle. It's really up to you. But at the end of the day, it's always about keeping symmetry. So as long as what you're doing and you're doing it consistently, it really doesn't matter. You have a lot of artistic freedom with that. So that's going to close out today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Realistically, again, you can take these practices and use them in a multitude of ways just by changing certain values or extruding or scaling certain sections. You can get so many different looks. And it's all just based off of starting with a curve modifier. Now, actually, there's one more thing I do want to show you guys. I know I said I was closing out the video, but I lied. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys one quick thing. Now, I'm not going to show you how to model out every little piece of this. This is going to be a quick 30-second thing, so I can just, anybody who's looking to make a recurve bow, this one confused and made me irritated for so long. So I'm going to show you guys really quickly. If we go Shift-A curve, and then we go down to path. Now, I'm not going to scale it this time. I'm just going to go select all the middle vertices, subdivide. Now, what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to take these 2 ends, and I'm going to move them up. Take these, move them down. Take these, move them up. Take this, middle one, and move it up just a little bit more. Now, what you'll see here is we get a nice kind of start of what looks to be a compound bow. Now, you can also take these ends, G and Z, and move them up. But basically what you're doing is keeping 2 ends on the bottom, curving out the middle, and then raising the 2 ends evenly, because then you get this shape. Because then we can just go down to geometry, and we'll do the profile trick just like what we did before, setting the resolution to 1, fill caps, blanking out that square completely, going down to where it says active spline, changing the U order from 5 to 6, unchecking smooth, and setting the bevel depth to 0.04. Now, one thing you can do, and you'll see here, is that the depth does not really apply the same on this. So we can do the same kind of trick where we take both of these points, dramatic bend, and then just go S and Z. Now, just like I told you before, though, if you don't like the way that it's looking, this is the reason why we don't apply the curve modifier yet. Because we can now go again, click on it, and S and Z. And I think I'm actually going to raise these whole parts up here, just like this. Then take these, move them in, up like that. And there we go. Now we have a nice start to our limbs. And then from here, you can just go right-click, convert to mesh, go in, and then just do the same tricks where we, loop select the whole, this part here, then drag select tool the end. I would also recommend flipping it. This way it's actually going to be facing the right orientation. So once you do this, We can go turn on proportional editing, just like what we do with all of them. So we're going to go SZ 0.5, and you'll see that it creates that kind of like little out shape. And we'll do the same thing on this side here. SZ 0.5, boom. And now we have the nice start for our compound bow. So from here, you would just add, your pulleys up here, and then your string that goes in between, maybe adding some gadgets in between. You can even like widen it out, separate it out into 2 pieces, add in some extra stuff. But I wanted to show you guys how to get that nice symmetrical looking bow shape for whenever you're trying to make a compound bow, for those of you who are trying to make more hunting style of games. But there is a lot of extra modeling and things that you would have to do for that, so that's the reason why I didn't want to go in too depth other than just giving you the starting shape for the compound bow itself. But that is officially it for today's video, guys. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any issues with the modeling section or anything that you're missing some keyboard shortcuts, please just let me know. I'll go ahead and try to make some, quick videos where it'll show you guys how to be able to set everything up. The other thing as well is I'm going to, like I said before, I'm going to leave a link to the original video, the Archery in Unreal episode 1. I'm going to put that in the bottom of the description, so this way you guys can revert back to that whenever you're ready to actually set up the rigging process and go through all of that, as again, today was just purely about different ways to model. But I hope you guys are going to be keeping up with those projects. I'm loving some of the stuff I'm seeing in the Discord, as well as some of the things I'm seeing in the, the overall channel here. So keep it up, guys. We got a lot more stuff coming the way. So, keep an eye on that subscription tab, making sure that we're, keeping up to date with all the videos. And I will see you guys on the next one. Stay animated.